What are some books you'd recommend to, say, herbalists or clinical herbalists?
Yes. Well, it depends. I always like to preface this by saying that it's it's so tempting to just go out and buy all the books, right?
Totally.
I feel
Just like all the courses too.
all the books, all the courses. And I think in some ways it's better to just buy a couple and really like dive through them, learn a lot from those few. And then when you feel like, okay, I've absorbed that, then maybe expand to another reference text that fills a need for you personally. So I think it's like the learning component sometimes keeps people from doing the practicing, where it's like, oh, well, I'm just going to learn this one more thing before I start seeing clients or before I promote myself, and then I'll be ready. And I'm like, no, you need to take what you already know, practice, use it, and then see like, oh, I wish I knew more about X, Y, or Z, and then buy a book that helps you meet that need, instead of just like, once I get through all the books in the world about herbs, then I'll be ready to start practicing. So that's the caveat to this answer.
Can I comment on that caveat first? I feel like that's just good life advice in general, not just for books and herbalism. I remember in my early 20s, I was obsessed with, say, spirituality and meditating and fasting and reading about spirituality. And I just kept going down this that spiral. And it was fine. It was probably very useful for my evolution and who I am today. But at the same time, I felt like I was lacking something because I wasn't actually doing anything. You know what I mean? And then it finally occurred to me, ironically, by reading another book about spirituality, they were saying, go find your place in the world by doing actual work. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's time to stop consuming. It's time to start like sharing and teaching and presenting. And so yeah, I just want to comment like that's totally true about life in general, including the reading books about herbalism. So.
Yeah. And I've heard people talk about that cycle as the sort of consumption creation cycle. And it's like the inhale and the exhale, like you need to balance them. So if you're only creating and putting things out without, taking some things in, then you do wind up sort of in a bubble. But if you're only taking things in and never creating, that you're also off balance. So I think it's got to be a little of both.
That's a good point. Yeah, because you don't want to just stop learning,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and I have seen some people, you get to where you suddenly think of like, oh, I've been doing this for so long, now I'm an expert.
Right.
Like, well, there's always more to learn. Things change.
Absolutely.
So that was a long-winded answer that I haven't actually responded to yet, but I'm just looking at my bookshelf here. So part of this is like, oh, well, there's some books that I've internalized so much that I don't use them anymore, which is hard because I'm like, they're still really important to me, but I don't actually work with them because they're just part of what I'm doing.
Totally.
But right now, the big ones that I'm turning to a lot are Krista Sinodinos's Essential Guide to Western, but is it botanical medicine or herbal medicine? One of those.
Essential Guide to Western Botanical Medicine, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that book. It's especially for herbs that I, know about, but maybe haven't worked with quite a lot. I feel like it's a really great way to brush up on it. And one of the reasons I love that book so much is that I feel like a lot of books sort of compile information where it's like, oh, the eclectics said this, and, Culpeper said this, and David Hoffman said this. But there's not that many books that are like, and here's what I have found. And for me, that's the jewel. Like somebody who's been practicing for a long time and is sharing their own reflections and experiences. Those are the kind of books where I'm like, oh, I want that because I know what I've been seeing, but I can read up on the eclectics and all those things myself, but I want to know, what have you learned from all of this? So for me, that's really, those are the tidbits that are really, really helpful.
Yeah, we were visiting with Paul Bergner April of last year, and I want to say he talked to us for probably about 30 minutes about how much he loved that book by Krista. So I'll include a link to that in the show notes. I'll also include a link to a 10-minute video that we produced with Krista where she kind of talks about the book and what's inside and all that. So yeah, it's a big, beefy book.
It is. It's a big, beefy book. I just refiled it because I usually have it out on my desk. It's really pretty too. There's lots of plant pictures. I also like Jill Stansberry's formulary series. again, it's based on her clinical experience. And so for me, again, that's just gold. Where I am in my practice is just hearing from other experienced herbalists about, and then some of my other favorites, it's ridiculous, but I do love a good medical textbook. So ridiculous. But I really love physiology. And so when I'm teaching a deep dive, what I do, like last year we did the gastrointestinal deep dive, and this year we're doing a hormone deep dive. So what I do is I go and I find out like what is the go-to textbook for gastroenterologists? Like what is their Bible essentially? And then I buy it and then I read it because I want to know, like, what do we know about how the system works? It doesn't have anything about herbs, but I can get a lot from just, what is our current understanding about these things? I can apply that to what I know about herbs and layer the two together. And that, for me, it's really helpful.
How important is anatomy and physiology education for the herbalist? And do you have any recommendations how, besides like saying getting a good textbook, how an herbalist could go about learning A&P?
Yeah, well, I feel kind of torn on this because I think it's depending on the type of herbalism you're practicing, it may have more or less importance. Yeah. The way that I practice, it's really, really important. I think everybody needs to have some basic understanding of, the major systems and,
sure.
For safety purposes and so forth. But I think there's plenty of people who were practicing a very different type of herbalism where it may not be front and center for them. And in that case, like, awesome, Yeah. But if it is a real, especially I think if you want to be evolving as a practitioner, we need to say like, what we understand about the system has changed. Like we now know things that we didn't know before. And so how do we adapt to that? And how do we speak with other practitioners who are using this language and who do have this understanding? So how do you learn about it? Well, Tammy Sweet, I know, has some great foundational A&P for, herbalists. So I think that course would be a great place to start. For more advanced people, I do in my deep dives. Those really take a single thing and go into them. So for example, we have, one about GERD and one about IBS and those types of things, but it's not a, comprehensive course about the whole of the body.
Yeah.
Other than that, I think part of it is just as things come up for you, you can take a deep dive into them. You have your first client who has diverticulosis and you're like, what is that? So then you go and you look it up and you look at some papers and you ask around and you see where you see it in textbooks and you start to piece it together like that. The problem is, of course, there's so many wackadoodles out there. You go down the Google rabbit hole, you might find yourself in an interesting position. So that's the hard part.
Hey everyone, this is Mason with HerbRally. Thanks so much for watching today's video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and also go ahead and subscribe. We come out with new herbal content each and every week. If you didn't know, HerbRally also lists herbalism events. We list herbalism events chronologically. We list them also by state. So you could just go ahead and search by Oregon or Wisconsin or wherever you live. You can find out what herbalism events are happening in your neck of the woods. We also list herbalism events, virtual herbal events. So if you can't make it to an in-person conference or plant walk, we list lots of virtual events as well. To find out more, you could go to herbrally.com/events or herbrally.com/virtual. But if you can help it, I would highly recommend trying to go to an herbalism conference. Those are some of the best learning experiences I've ever had, and that's where you can find different herbal teachers, and then maybe you could perhaps take their apprenticeship. But yeah, just do what you can. Get out there and learn about the herbs, like yarrow, dandelion, corn, all the above, like all the medicinal herbs. And we'll see you out there. Hope to see you at an herb conference. All right, bye.